Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
What happened after watching this footage? Today's story will have a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. Okay, since I can't reach her and she hasn't called me, she's obviously not very interested in keeping her job. I want you to call HR and ask them to post our regular ad for a new secretary. Yes, sir, Vanessa answered sadly. I also finally managed to talk to Meredith. She'll be back on Monday. Make sure the temp agency knows about this, please. Vanessa confirmed she would take care of it, but before making any calls, she needed to break the news to Alicia. Meredith will be back on Monday, she announced. She'll be back? How do you know? Alicia asked. Mr. Johnson spoke to her. He also spoke to Aaron, Vanessa said. Aaron? Is he the one who answered their apartment? He said Wendy was staying with her parents? Yes, Vanessa confirmed. Mr. Johnson had HR put out an ad for a replacement. They obviously didn't even go on their honeymoon. God, she must be terrified, Alicia said. Yes, Vanessa agreed, but imagine how horrified Aaron was watching her satisfy that guy. Yeah, I know. I've talked to the other girls before. Vicky's husband still won't talk to her, and Mindy hasn't seen Mark since that night. She's very scared. She said she's never seen him this angry. He didn't hit her, did he? Alicia asked. No, I don't think so. She would tell me if that happened. She prays he'll calm down, but she doesn't think that will happen. She thinks he'll want a divorce. Alicia didn't say anything. She remembered her own situation. Vanessa guessed what she was thinking. What about Dexter? Any news? Not really, Alicia sighed in response. He picked up another load of clothes last week. He was staying at a motel, not a studio. I don't know what I'll do if he wants a divorce, Vanessa. What about counseling? Would he agree to that? I don't know, Alicia admitted. I don't know if it would do any good, but I could try. I guess it wouldn't do any harm. That evening, Alicia wondered if Dexter would be open to couples therapy. She hadn't heard from him and wasn't sure if he had watched part of the video yet or not. She decided to wait until the weekend to see if he would call her first. On Friday afternoon, the girls were all shocked when they saw Sylvia enter. Alicia was the first to react. I thought you quit, she said unfriendly. Sylvia noticed this and responded awkwardly, yes, I just stopped by to pick up a few personal items, and Mr. Johnson said I could pick up my check today instead of waiting for it in the mail. She hoped for friendly faces but saw none. I'm so sorry, girls. I was really going to delete that video, but I completely forgot about it. I didn't even know Manny took my phone until he started screaming in the reception area. I'm so sorry. Yes, they got caught because of the video, Alicia said. But everyone knew they did something wrong. Sylvia's apology softened some sentiments. How's Manny taking it? Vicky asked. Not very well. It wasn't my idea to quit, he's forcing me to do it. I'm also sleeping in the guest room. He's not thinking about divorce yet, thank God. He started talking about going to a counselor, so I think we'll go to therapy. Is it true? Alicia asked. Do you know a good counselor? Yeah, one of the guys Manny works with recommended someone. It's a woman, she's supposed to be very nice. Why do you want her number? Yes. Do you have it? Alicia asked. No, not on me, but I have it at home. I'll call later and give it to you. What about the others? Sylvia asked, looking around. Everyone agreed that it couldn't hurt to have the number. After talking with the boss, Vanessa was curious. Have you heard anything about Wendy? No, but I heard from Katie Henderson. She was one of the bridesmaids. That Monday after the wedding, Aaron went to a lawyer to get the marriage annulled. Oh, damn, Vicky commented. Yes, I think Wendy is staying with her parents. It's unlikely she'll go back to work, Vanessa said. Well, Sylvia said regretfully, Mr. Johnson said he cleared my desk, and everything is with HR, so I'd better go. She lowered her head. I'm really sorry for all the pain I caused. We all got carried away that night. We shouldn't have done what we did. It was stupid. I was the stupidest of them all, recording it and then leaving the phone. It ruined lives. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, she said again, tears in her eyes. She left before everyone got ready to leave. That day, Sylvia called Alicia with the therapist's number and asked her to pass it on to the others. This was the last time they spoke to each other. Alicia's weekend was the worst. At least she had a job during the week to take her mind off things. During the day, when she was alone at home, she only thought about what Dexter was doing or thinking. Had he contacted a lawyer? If so, what would she do? Fight the divorce? Try to get him to stay with her? What would be the point? No, she'd messed up. If he wanted a divorce, she would agree to whatever he thought was fair. But how would she live without him? Despite her determination to remain strong through the ordeal, she could not hold back her tears as she thought about life without him. Dexter also thought a lot. That morning, he spent a sleepless night and went to the waterfront to watch the sunrise over Lake Michigan. Vivid shades of orange and red danced on the waves like brightly colored fairies from a childhood dream. A beautiful, warm glow enveloped the tall buildings in the city center and shimmered off the reflective glass surfaces. Dexter loved this city. It was warm and friendly, full of life and excitement. But would it be the same without Alicia, or would the city he loved become cold and empty? It had been a week since he left, and he still didn't know what to do. Maybe if he talked to her, really talked face to face, he could see if she was being sincere about this being the only time. Alicia was cleaning up. It was the only thing she could think of to take her mind off her marriage problems. If he didn't call before 6, she'd call him herself. In the meantime, she needed something to do. Vacuuming and dusting seemed like a good idea. She was about to take a break when the phone rang. "Hello, it's me." Her heart skipped a beat when she heard his voice. "Hello?" There was hope in her voice, but also fear. He could call to say that everything is forgiven and he is returning home, or he could say that he is filing for divorce. She held her breath and let him speak. "Will you be home in an hour? I want to come and talk." "Yeah, sure. I'm just doing a little cleaning. How about I make us lunch?" "Yes, okay," he replied. "See you in a bit." "Okay," she answered quickly. "Oh, and Dexter?" "Yes?" "Just come in. It's still your home." "Okay, see you soon," he said and hung up. Alicia then realized what she looked like and quickly went to the shower. When Dexter walked through the door, she was fresh, clean, well-dressed, and lightly scented with his favorite perfume. Not that he really noticed, he had other thoughts. She poured coffee, and they sat down to dinner. There was little conversation until they finished. Alicia was on pins and needles. She also had something she wanted to talk about but would wait for him to speak first. "I watched the video, at least part of it. Enough to see that you really looked like you didn't know what to do until this guy took matters into his own hands. I can only imagine how hard it was to watch. I know you had to force yourself to watch it, and you have no idea how much I appreciate it. I'm so sorry I did that. I have no excuses, Dexter." She needed to catch her breath before continuing. "I cheated on you, but I swear that was the only time." He could literally see the doubts he still had. "Are you sorry you did it, or are you sorry you got caught?" he asked. No. I regret letting this happen. I knew better. I wasn't wrong about what I was doing. I knew I was cheating on you. I didn't mean to do it consciously. I just got caught up in all the fuss, and when the situation arose, I gave in. The only thing I regret about getting caught is that it hurts you." That phrase, "I gave in," reminded him of all the times he was tempted but didn't give in. He was unaware of his expression as he wondered why his wife was not as resilient as he was. Did that mean she didn't love him as much as he loved her? Alicia could see the internal struggle on his face. She was sure that she would lose him without professional help. "Dexter, would you agree to go to couples therapy with me?" He thought for just a second. I don't know. What's the use of that? "Dexter, I broke your heart, and I don't know how to put it back together or if it's even possible. I don't know, but I want to try, and I need someone trained to help. Please, she begged. I have the name of a therapist who is said to be very good. Please let me make an appointment. He didn't see how the therapist could calm him down if his wife couldn't. But if it was possible, okay, he replied. But call me and tell me what times and dates are available before you make an exact appointment. I will, she said with some relief and hope. On Monday morning, when Meredith returned to work, it seemed like the old teen was almost at full strength. So the five of them went to lunch together. It was the first time they had gone out together since their wedding, but it wasn't like before. There were no jokes, no laughter, not even sarcastic remarks. It was more like a support group. Once everyone was seated, Meredith started talking. She was outside the circle and knew nothing about what was happening. So, whose marriages survived? No, Mindy replied. Well, I'm not sure. I haven't heard from Mark since that night, but I think he'll ask for a divorce. Meredith was surprised and felt awkward asking such a question. Really? God, I am sorry. I knew our husbands were angry, but I didn't think anyone would get a divorce. Of course, she said, almost afraid to ask, what about the others? We all have problems, Alicia volunteered. I still don't know what's going to happen. Dexter is living in a motel. We talked over the weekend, and he agreed to couples therapy, so I'm still hopeful. Oh, God, Liz, I'm so sorry. Meredith began to realize how devastating the situation was. What about you? Vicky asked, interrupting the conversation. Meredith's expression changed. Well, it's no secret that I have long suspected David of cheating. That night after the wedding, he confessed. He admitted it, Vanessa exclaimed. Meredith nodded her head slowly. Yeah, well, not right away. He started yelling at me as soon as we got in the car. Finally, when we got home, I was just so tired of it that I yelled back and asked, what about you? How many women are there? Did you get laid? I never had the courage to accuse him of anything before, so at first, he was surprised. Then he got a guilty look on his face. Of course, Mindy put in, he knew he was caught. Yeah, he didn't even try to deny it. He asked how long I knew, and I said, a long time. Then he asked why I never talked about it. What did you say? Asked Alicia. I said I never told him because I still loved him and asked if he loved me. He said he did. We talked all night. I asked if he wanted freedom, if he wanted a divorce, but he said no. We both started crying and decided that we would try to repair our marriage. Vicky was the first to congratulate her, followed by the others. By the end of dinner, they were all aware of each other's marital problems. 2 days later, Alicia called Dexter and offered 3 possible times and dates for his counseling appointment. She explained that the therapist wanted to spend an hour with each of them individually. Alicia had already scheduled her appointment, so Dexter chose one of the suggested times, and Alicia booked it. Dexter had no idea what to expect. He had never been to any therapist before. Will there be his and her sofas? He thought with a smile. When he got out of the car, a 747 was flying over the building. He looked up. It was huge and so close that he could almost count the rivets on its belly. He watched it cut through the sky, fly over the O'Hare fence, and land on the runway. He waited until a small cloud of smoke indicated that it had landed safely before turning and entering the building. Inside, he looked at the handwritten room number and headed towards number 319. The first thing he noticed was a carved wooden sign on the wall of the small reception area. Asterisk, the perfect marriage is 2 imperfect people who refuse to give in to each other. Asterisk, it was a pleasant statement and made him smile. Yes, sir? May I help you? Asked the receptionist. Yeah. I'm Dexter Samuelson. I have an appointment. Of course, Mr. Samuelson. Let me let her know you're here. The young brunette pressed a button and announced his arrival. He heard the doctor's voice telling her to let him through. The doctor's name was Mrs. Angela Lindstrom. She was a rather simple woman in her early 30s. Dexter didn't like her way of communicating, but she seemed to know her stuff. At least the questions she asked were pointed and aimed at his problems. After the first hour, he may not have liked her, but he respected her. The second week was their first session together. Both knew it wouldn't be a walk in the park, but neither was prepared for Dr. Lindstrom's unconventional methods. She leaned back confidently in the leather chair. "Mrs. Samuelson, you told me about your feelings in this situation, which you did not express to Mr. Samuelson because you thought it sounded selfish. I want you to tell him about those feelings now." Alicia was taken by surprise. "Doctor, I told you this in confidence." I can't tell him this. It sounds terrible. I shouldn't even tell you this," she cried. "Mrs. Samuelson, these are your feelings. The first thing you two need to do is open your hearts to each other. If you are not ready for this, then it will be a waste of time." Alicia couldn't look at him. She couldn't look him in the eye and say it, so she lowered her head and spoke quietly. She sighed and exhaled. "You hurt my feelings. I know how that sounds after what I did, but it's the truth. I love you. I know I screwed up, but I can't believe you think I cheated on you before." Emotions were already overwhelming her. They hadn't been there even 10 minutes, and her eyes were already filled with tears. "Are you kidding? Did I hurt your feelings? Well, forgive me for everything. God, you tore my heart out, and I hurt your feelings?" He was almost ready to give up on therapy and the marriage, but Dr. Lindstrom anticipated his reaction and encouraged him to continue. "Why don't you believe her when she says it was the only time?" Dr. Lindstrom asked. "Because it's not only cheating that's bad enough in itself, but she was sneaky and dishonest. She knew this guy would be there. You should have seen the way she was dressed that night. She knew full well that they hired a stripper." "Yes," Alicia cried. "I knew he'd be there, but I had no idea it would go that far. I thought he'd strip down to his swim trunks or something. We'd put dollar bills in his belt and that's all. If I knew what would happen, I would never have gone to this stupid party." She screamed, starting to sob. "Why didn't you tell me about him before you left? Why such secrecy?" She was still crying, but she answered through her tears. "I don't know. I guess I didn't want you to get the wrong idea." "You cheated on me, you mean," he said, bitterness in his voice. "Got it right. You went behind my back. Alicia, now I wonder how many times you've done this. I only know about it because your stupid friend left a video. How many times have you done something like that and not gotten caught?" Alicia finally began to realize the full consequences of her actions, not only the betrayal but also the dishonesty before and after. "Alicia, under the circumstances, I could forgive a one-time mistake. If you had told me about the dancer right away and then admitted what happened when you got home that night, it would have been a different matter. But the secrecy, deceit, and reluctance to take responsibility for what you did makes me think this has happened before. Can't you give me a chance? After all these years, don't I deserve it? Alicia, I can't lie to myself. I can't convince myself to believe in something I don't believe in. I've always considered you an honest woman, a woman with dignity, someone who would never cheat on me. But you showed me that I was wrong. Not only did you cheat, but you were also dishonest. So now I'm wondering how long I've been wrong." Tears were almost streaming from her eyes. Her voice was weak. "So there's no hope, right? How can I convince you? I can't. Can I?" For several minutes, the only sound in the doctor's office was Alicia's sobs. "Yes, Mrs. Samuelson, there is hope. If there weren't, we wouldn't be sitting here. Mr. Samuelson, your wife and I discussed something during her first visit. My colleagues think my approach is very radical, but I have achieved great results. Good luck with him. I discussed this with Mrs. Samuelson first because I needed to know how far she was willing to go to save her marriage, and I can tell she didn't even blink. It's not a quick fix, it doesn't happen overnight. But if you stick with it, it can help restore your faith and trust in your wife in the long run." This sounded quite ominous to Dexter. What was she going to offer, an iron chastity belt? "The first thing I want you to do is come home," she said. Seeing his look, she immediately went into an explanation to prevent his objections. "Mr. Samuelson, we need to restore some trust in your relationship. We can't do that if you sit in a motel room and wonder what your wife is doing, where she is, and who she is with. You need to know where she is, and that's why you need to be at home." He didn't particularly like it, but it sounded logical. "This brings us to the second part of the program," she continued, turning to Dexter. "You will also go to the bank and remove your wife's name from all accounts and credit cards. You will sit down together and determine the minimum amount of money she needs for gas, food, and other small items and give it to her in the form of a weekly allowance. You will activate the GPS on her phone so you can track her location at any time of the day or night. Every day after work, she will give you a phone with a saved history so you can see who she communicated with during the day." "Oh, that's ridiculous," Dexter said. "I don't have to do all these things. Mr. Samuelson, you can keep coming here, where we'll work on trust issues and maybe make some progress. But as soon as she stays 20 minutes late, you'll be back to wondering where she's been, and we'll be back to square one." He looked at his crying wife. "Is that okay with you?" She simply nodded, wiping her nose with a handkerchief. He thought about it and reluctantly agreed. "Okay, let's try." The next day was Friday. Although he had paid for the room until Sunday, Dexter packed his bags in the morning and headed home. After work, when he entered, he immediately smelled a pleasant aroma coming from the kitchen. As he entered, something on the table caught his attention. It was Alicia's wallet and phone. There was also a detailed list of all her expenses, including her morning cup of coffee from Starbucks and her hair appointment every couple of weeks. "Hello," she said, greeting him in a simple house dress. Although she didn't try to seduce him, he thought that would be the worst move for her. "Something smells delicious. I stopped at that little fish store on the way home and bought red snapper. I'll cook it with almond sauce. It'll be ready in 30 minutes. "What is all this?" he asked, pointing to the items on the table. "I thought we could discuss this after dinner," she replied. "You really want to do this? It's like you're on parole and I'm your inspector." "That's right. I'm on parole, Dex. I committed a crime. I have to be punished no matter how long it takes, no matter how long it takes for you to trust me again," she said. "If I could only convince you that I have been a faithful, devoted wife all these years and ask for forgiveness for one of my sins, but I can't. You made that pretty clear in the doctor's office, and you're right. I understand why you have so many doubts, and I don't blame you. That's why this seems like the next best step. We'll see," he muttered, turning around. "I'm going to go take a shower," he said as he left. After a month of eating out, Dexter began to appreciate his wife's cooking skills again. The red snapper was delicious. After dinner, he and Alicia discussed the program outlined by the doctor. They found a GPS app for her phone that not only showed her location but also stored a history by date. He liked this app. He obviously didn't intend to spend the entire day tracking her every move, but he could see where she was if he wanted. They worked out a weekly budget that still allowed her to go out to dinner, but the gas money was based on her gas mileage. She had enough money for gas to drive to work and to the store a couple of times a week, and that was all. Instead of removing her name from the credit cards, he simply collected all the plastic cards she carried. "I'll put them in a safe deposit box, so if anything happens to me, you'll still have access to the money," he said. This was so typical of him. Silently, she sat and wondered why she hadn't put him first like he always did for her. He always put her interests above his own. Even now, she remembered that party. If she hadn't considered her friends more important than her own husband, she would never have caused him such pain. She sighed internally. There was nothing to be done now, nothing other than trying to regain his trust. They discussed everything except sleeping arrangements. I moved all my stuff into the other bedroom," she said, hoping he would object and say they would sleep together. But this did not happen. A flat-sounding okay was his only comment. "I thought you'd want this, but if you'd rather sleep together, I'd." "No, that's better," he said, not even letting her finish. She expected him to say this, but it still hurt to hear it. "I have a couple of hours of editing work to do, so is there anything else we haven't discussed?" "No," she replied. "I think we're all done." "Okay then. I'll be in the office. If you remember anything, let me know." With these words, he stood up from the table and disappeared around the corner. Alicia went into the living room and curled up with a book. If she strained, she could hear him working in the other room. Even with all their problems, it was good just to know he was back in the house. She felt safe when he was around. On weekends, they lived like housemates, nothing more. On Monday morning, Alicia was sitting at her desk when Vanessa walked in. One look and she knew something was clearly wrong. It was obvious that Vanessa had been crying. In fact, she was still sobbing as she passed by. "Vanessa, what happened?" "Oh, Liz," she sobbed. "Terry wants a divorce." "What? Why?" He knows. He knows about that party." "How?" "He wasn't even at the reception." "How did he know?" asked Alicia. "Mindy's husband, Mark. He's crazy. He's suing the dancer and the company he worked for." "I was called to testify," she said, starting to cry again. "Terry was at home on Friday when I received the summons. He started asking questions, and when I couldn't answer, he got angry and started making calls." She wiped her eyes again. By this time, she already had a small audience of other secretaries. "I don't know who he called, but by Sunday, he had a copy of that damn video." She was sobbing and trying to catch her breath. I looked like such a damn fool." "I'm sorry," Mindy said, apologizing for her husband. "I knew Mark was going against the dancer, but I never thought it would affect you." "Now, what's going on?" "It was Mr. T.T.I. Johnson," Vanessa replied. He looked at Vanessa and saw that she was crying, but it was becoming increasingly difficult for him to sympathize. He had a business to run, and for the past month, his secretaries had experienced one disaster after another. His patience was running out. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bridges Johnson," Vanessa muttered. "I'll be fine." "Girls," he said, turning back to his friends, "come on, we all have work to do." Mr. G. Johnson turned and walked back to his office as the girls went to their places. He had no intention of interfering with his employees' problems, but something had to be done. They didn't know it yet, but this was the last day they could all discuss their problems over lunch. At about 3 o'clock, Mr. Kai Johnson called everyone to a meeting. Once everyone had gathered, he set new rules. From now on, he informed them, lunch breaks would alternate every 15 minutes, starting at 11:30. He left it up to the girls to decide who would go when. Later in the week, Alicia and Dexter had a second therapy session with Dr. Lindstrom. She asked the couple if they had followed her recommendations, and they said yes. Last week was an eye-opener for Alicia. In her mind, she knew that other than that party, she had been a faithful and devoted wife. So it really hurt her to know that Dexter suspected otherwise. After hearing her husband's rationalizations in the previous session, she completely understood him and did not blame him for feeling the way he did. As long as those doubts were present, she didn't see how he could trust her again, even with Dr. Lindstrom's help. For the next few weeks, life seemed like an existence in a fog. Alicia's life at home hadn't changed since Dexter's return. Every day, she put the phone on the table so he could check it when he got home. Sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't. During all this time, they never made love or had any intimate contact. He never kissed her or even told her that he loved her. He was no longer the man she married. He never returned home smiling and in a good mood like before. His lips rarely moved upward, and she saw only sadness in his eyes. She knew that this must have affected his professional life as well as his personal life, but he didn't tell her about work anymore. She missed the stories he used to share about how things went wrong on set. Somehow, he always made them funny. It was the same at work. The boss's new rules not only disrupted their lunch breaks but also showed them that he was tired of all the drama in the office. They knew he had no qualms about firing people. Everyone began to pull away and keep their marital problems to themselves, even though they were all in it together. Alicia found it difficult to know whether her sessions with Dr. Lindstrom were actually helping. She was grateful that Dexter was back home but had doubts about whether he still loved her. It took her a while to work up the courage to ask, and she thought she might need support when she did. So, she waited until their fifth therapy session. "Dexter," she said, taking a deep breath and looking at him, "do you still love me?" The doctor sat quietly in her chair and waited with Alicia for his answer. "You don't think I still love you?" Dexter flared up. "I'm asking," Alicia said, since you came home, we barely talk, and you don't say it anymore. You never say you love me. Do you think I would do all this if I didn't love you?" he asked. "Yes," Dr. Lindstrom interrupted. It was a direct question, and it deserved a direct and honest answer. Dexter looked into the troubled face of the woman who had betrayed him and gave the only answer he could. Yes, of course I still love you. But no one has ever hurt me like this, and I just don't know how to deal with it." Earlier that day, Alicia had thought about giving up, but his answer gave her new hope. As long as he still answered yes to her question, she would never give up on him. On the car ride home that night, she had an idea, but in the current climate, it seemed impossible. She needed to think about it more. The next morning, at the end of the work week, when Alicia entered the office, her eyes met Vanessa's. They were red again as Alicia wondered what new fate had befallen her friend. Vanessa stood up and walked over. "Can you talk to me for a few minutes?" "Liz, I'm so scared," Vanessa said, her voice trembling. Alicia's eyes darted to Mr. Johnson's door to make sure he wasn't looking. "Don't worry, Mr. T. Johnson left for a meeting before 11, Vanessa said. "Okay," Alicia replied. "Let's go to the break room." They both took a cup of bad coffee from the machine and sat down at the small round table. Tears began to form in Vanessa's eyes. She took a deep breath and began to speak in a voice hoarse from crying. "Liz, I'm so scared. I've never lived alone, and now I'm faced with being a single mother with 2 small dependent children. I don't know what to do. Did he really say he was getting a divorce? Maybe it's not too late." She noticed that her friend was slowly nodding her head. "Oh yes, he's already started everything," Vanessa replied. "He moved out and rented an apartment. He has a lawyer and everything. Yesterday, I received the papers." Alicia reached out and took her hand. "I'm so sorry," she said, trying to console her friend. "He'll probably have to pay alimony and child support." "No child support," Vanessa told Alicia. "I will receive child support, but the most I can get in this state is 25% of his gross income. I found this on the internet. This is the maximum, even with 2 children. That's a little over $350 a week." She pulled a napkin from the holder on the table and wiped her eyes. "It covers the mortgage, but not much else. I'm not sure I can keep the house." "Why no alimony?" Alicia asked. "He earns much more than I do. He doesn't offer any. I guess I could hire my own lawyer and fight him, but then I'd have to pay a lawyer, and they're not cheap. I called my brother to see what he thought, but he wasn't too happy either. He said that I could spend more on a lawyer than I would receive in alimony." She wiped her eyes again and continued. "I think I'll just take what he offers." She closed her eyes as if she were praying. "I just want him to come home." "I know, honey," Alicia said, squeezing her hand in support. "How do you and Dexter get along?" Vanessa sobbed. "I don't know. It's been hard. The therapist we see has a specific program that we follow, but I'm not sure it really helps. I think you just need to give it time. I've read that healing a relationship after something like this can take years, so if it takes that long, I'm willing to wait. I just want my old Dexter back. I don't think I've ever heard him laugh since I found out. Not even once." They talked a little more but had to get back to work. Alicia had been thinking a lot about the idea she had in the car that night and had pretty much thought of everything except for one big issue, that damn GPS. She couldn't tell Dexter what she was planning and had no idea how many times a day he checked her location, if at all. She just had to take a calculated risk. That night, as soon as she got home, Alicia ran to his office and checked her husband's work schedule. Next week, he would be very busy on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday with a major shoot. He would be in the studio for some time, but there would also be 3 location shoots. This was perfect, she thought. Most likely, he would be so busy that he would not have time to check my GPS. The weekend passed quietly, like all recent ones. Early Monday morning, Alicia stood at her dresser and closed her purse with great sadness. She took a deep breath and strengthened her resolve, knowing that this was the only way out. As soon as the chaos of Monday morning died down at work, she asked to speak with Mr. Johnson. "Mr. Johnson, I know I shouldn't ask, and believe me, if it weren't so important, I wouldn't. But, well, sir, I have to leave work tomorrow afternoon, she said. Mr. Johnson just looked at her and sighed. Tell me, Mrs. Samuelson, what can I do to stop this from happening again? Well, after Wendy's wedding, I had 7 good, dedicated, hard-working secretaries. 2 have left, and the rest seem to move from one crisis to another all the time. So I would like to know what I can do to make sure this never happens again, she said with authority. Alicia started to get nervous. It seemed she might be denied time off. She wondered what she would do if that happened. It started to seem possible, but she didn't panic yet. I don't think there's anything you could have done, Mr. Johnson. But don't worry, it won't happen again. It's unlikely you'll find 7 more women as stupid as us, she complained. I understand, he replied. Does this time off you need have anything to do with what happened at the wedding? Alicia learned a lesson about honesty and openness. Yes, sir. I was just as stupid as everyone else. As a result, I am fighting for my marriage. He stared at her for a few seconds before asking, Do you need all day? Alicia hesitated. I'm not sure, she answered honestly. I have an appointment downtown for an hour, but I don't know how long it will take. If I have time, I'll be back before the end of the day. Okay, he said. Just try to get as much done as you can in the morning. Yes, sir. I'll make sure everything is done before I leave. And thank you, sir. He looked at her a little thoughtfully. My wife and I will be celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. We've both made mistakes, not the ones you're talking about, but let's just say things weren't always smooth sailing. However, after all the ups and downs, we are still together and still love each other very much. I wish everyone could have what we have after 40 years. Maybe this is your chance for such happiness. If so, I don't want to be the one who gets in your way. Alicia had tears of gratitude in her eyes as she thanked him again and left. She had to skip lunch. At noon, she wondered if Dexter was following her as she drove through the city. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she felt the sadness of her mission. When she returned home that night, she was on pins and needles, unsure if Dexter was tracking her GPS. When he didn't mention anything before going to bed, a grateful Alicia slid under the sheets with a sigh of relief. Now, if only her luck would last one more day, she thought as she laid her head on the pillow. She considered her husband's schedule for Tuesday. He and Cindy would probably grab a bite to eat at a small diner a block from the studio. They would then pack all of his equipment for the trip, and by 1 p.m., they would head out to meet the client. Years ago, when Dexter couldn't afford an assistant, she would sometimes help him on set. She saw him at work. He was all business once he got there and started working. She knew he would never look at the tracking device on his phone. It would be the very last thing he'd think about. The next day, Alicia worked diligently to ensure everything was done before she left. She stopped by her boss's office on her way out to thank him again. He wished her luck, and she went on her way. Just like the day before, she was nervous. She looked at the car clock and saw that it was only 12:30. She imagined Cindy and Dexter loading his SUV with suitcases containing lighting equipment, light stands, battery packs, cameras, and all the other equipment he took to filming. She wondered if he would look at the phone before leaving. If so, would he call to find out where she was going or wait until the evening to ask when she would be back? She didn't know. All she could do was wait and watch. Finally, it was all over. Alicia hoped her nervousness about the GPS wouldn't ruin everything, but a preliminary assessment indicated everything should be fine. She felt great relief when she returned to the office at 4 o'clock that night. Like the night before, Dexter said nothing about her going downtown. For the first time since their wedding, Alicia fell asleep with a smile on her face. This should work, was her last thought before drifting off to sleep. On Thursday morning, Alicia was pleased to see a Chicago courier truck pull up to the office. She met the courier at the door and gladly signed for the large envelope he was holding. Later that evening, her heart raced as she and Dexter walked into Dr. Lindstrom's office and took their seats. The doctor began, turning to Dexter. "How are things going?" Dexter took a deep breath before speaking. "I don't know. I hate all this tracking of Liz's every move. It's just not me." I don't think I can keep doing this." They didn't talk much, so this was news to both Alicia and the doctor. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized how important the envelope in her purse was. He seemed ready to give up. This could be her last chance. The doctor started to say something, but Alicia interrupted. "Dexter, is it that you can't forgive me for what I did, or do you still have doubts about whether I cheated on you before?" "Liz, I have already forgiven you for this. I've watched this damn video several times. I know you drank. I heard the other girls egging you on, chanting and challenging you to do it. I saw how excited they were and how hesitant you were. But I still wonder if this was the first and only time." "Liz, I can't help it," Alicia said. She first took a tissue from her purse and wiped her eyes, then reached into her purse again and pulled out an envelope. "Here," she said, handing it to him. "What is this?" he asked. "Open it," she replied. He read the return address. The company name and logo were printed in the upper left corner, Hamlin Polygraph. "Did you pass the lie detector?" he asked, looking up at his crying wife. She simply nodded her head. "It's still sealed." "You didn't open it?" "I didn't have to open it, Dexter." "I know what it will say," she sobbed. Dexter hesitated. Thoughts raced through his head. Was this what he was waiting for, proof that this was a one-time event, or would this be the final nail in the coffin? He looked at Dr. Lindstrom, as if seeking advice. "Well, come on, open it," Alicia told him. He tore the envelope and pulled out the contents. There were several loose pages on top and one long page folded like an accordion. He took the first page in his hands and began to read. According to this, the operator reports that the client answered the following questions truthfully and without deception. There were several more legal statements, but he was interested in the first phrase. It was signed by someone named James Yule, and underneath his name was his license number. "Can I take a look?" Dr. Lindstrom asked, leaning forward in her chair and extending her hand across the table. Dexter handed over the first page and looked at the second. "I know this company, Mr. Samuelson. They are highly regarded as one of the best in the city. Jim Yule is one of their most experienced operators." Dexter was too busy reading the second page to pay attention to the doctor's words. He recognized the first few questions as basic questions. Alicia was asked things like, "Is your married name Alicia Samuelson, and is your maiden name Hackett?" She was asked how old she was and answered in the negative. She was asked if she lived at their address and a few more personal questions. Dexter scrolled through the obvious questions until he found the one he was looking for. "Since your marriage, how many men other than your husband have you had a night relations with?" Answer: 1. The word truth was printed next to her answer. This was followed by several of the usual questions until another one caught Dexter's attention. "Since your marriage, how many times have you had intimate relations with someone other than your husband?" Answer: 1 again. The word truth was next to it. Dexter, reading 3 pages of questions, noticed that they returned to this basic question again and again, though asked in different ways. It reappeared on the next page. "Before the May 10th incident, had you had any intimate relations with anyone other than your husband since your marriage?" Answer: no. Dexter was so engrossed in reading the report that he was completely unaware of what was happening around him. He began to study the actual lie detector sheet but couldn't make it out. It didn't matter, this was the proof he was waiting for. He wondered why he hadn't thought of a lie detector in the beginning. It would certainly have saved them both a lot of suffering. Then it dawned on him. He looked at his wife with hope in his eyes. It should have cost a couple of hundred at least. More like $450, the doctor intervened. He looked at her and then back at his wife. $450? Where did you get the money to pay for this? Alicia looked down at the napkin she now held in her lap. She barely managed to say the words. I sold my grandmother's ring," she admitted quietly. Dexter was stunned. "You, oh Alicia. Why? That ring meant everything to you." "For what?" she asked. "No, Dexter. The ring meant a lot, but you're the only one who means everything to me," she said. Dexter looked at Dr. Lindstrom's somewhat puzzled face and explained, "It was a family heirloom. Her grandmother personally gave it to her just hours before she died." He looked back at Alicia but still addressed the doctor. She absolutely treasured that ring. "Why didn't you just ask me for money?" he asked. I wasn't sure what you would say. We didn't talk much for a few weeks. I didn't know what you were thinking. I was afraid that you would say no. And then what would I do? It was my only hope, and I couldn't risk you stopping me somehow," she sobbed. "Darling, I wish I had thought about this a long time ago. You should have contacted me. I'm so sorry about the ring. I am very sorry." Alicia felt her heart start beating again after weeks of stagnation. Both she and the doctor understood the term of endearment. It was the first time in a long time that he had called her anything other than her name, and for the first time in weeks, there was no anger in his voice. Selling her grandmother's ring was probably the hardest thing she had to do, but if it meant getting her husband back, it would be worth it. Alicia raised the wet wipe to her eyes again and wiped away the tears. "Please forgive me, Dexter. I'm so sorry I hurt you." Between the video and the lie detector in his hands, Dexter was confident in his decision. We are all human, we all have weaknesses. Sometimes love is not only about never saying sorry but also about forgiving. Her grandmother's ring was the most selfless act of true love he could imagine. Now it was his turn. He stood up from his chair, placed the papers on the corner of Dr. Lindstrom's desk, and walked over to his wife. Alicia saw love and forgiveness in his eyes. On weak knees, she rose to accept his embrace. "Oh, my dear," he murmured as they embraced. Alicia wanted to tell him again how sorry she was, but she couldn't say a word between her sobs. She felt his strong hands stroking her back as her body shook with crying. Okay, honey. Everything will be okay," he said, trying to comfort her. He pulled away and placed his hands on either side of her face. He gently took her chin and raised her head to kiss her tenderly. "I forgive you, darling," he said, grabbing her chin and lifting her head slightly to kiss her. "Just don't ever do that again," he added with a slight smile. "Oh, Dexter," she cried, hugging him. "I will never hurt you again. Never, never, never." "Well, I think our session is over," the doctor said. They almost forgot about her. Dexter turned his head towards the smiling doctor. "Yes, and I don't think we'll be back again," Dexter said. Dr. Lindstrom simply nodded in approval. On the way out, Dexter remembered the question he wanted to ask before leaving. "Doctor, I've never thought about a lie detector, but I would think that in your situation, it would be one of the first things you would recommend." In fact, the doctor said in a serious voice, "If your wife had discussed this with me beforehand, I would have talked her out of it. Most people have something to hide, even if it has nothing to do with cheating or their marriage. Psychologically, they wonder if a lie detector will reveal their deepest, darkest secrets. As a result, many people become very nervous and fail tests even if they tell the truth. I've seen it backfire on them too many times." Alicia was still wiping her eyes when she looked at the doctor. "Thank you for all your help, Dr. Lindstrom." The doctor smiled widely again. "Please, Mrs. Samuelson, I wish you both nothing but happiness." In the car, Alicia tried to apologize again, but Dexter told her, "That's enough, honey. Enough. From here, we pick up the pieces and move on. I won't say it still doesn't hurt, but I know it wasn't intentional, and I now know it was the first and last time. When we get home, you will return your things to the bedroom." Alicia almost couldn't wait for Dexter to open the door before running upstairs and moving her things. It didn't take long. She was almost exhausted from running back and forth. When she finished and found her forgiving husband in his office, still a little apprehensive, she stood in the doorway and asked, "Can I kiss you?" "You have to kiss me, or the whole deal is off," he joked. For the first time in a long time, she saw his sense of humor. She literally jumped into his lap and wrapped her arms around his neck before kissing him passionately. "God, I love you so much," she said, pressing her lips to his again. They hadn't even left each other yet when Dexter had already made up his mind, editing be damned. "Come on," he said, standing up and taking her hand. "It's time to start picking up those pieces I've been talking about. This time, there will be no blindfolds, no role-playing games, no gymnastics in the bedroom. It's time for both of us to reaffirm our love for each other." When Alicia looked into his eyes, she saw no more anger or pain, only devotion. He leaned down and kissed her very tenderly on the lips. Instinctively, she lifted her chin so he could continue kissing her neck and face. They had gentle night as they both tried to regain normal breathing. They hugged silently, knowing that the most difficult period of their lives was now in the past. It was officially over. Over the next week, things started to feel more normal. Cindy immediately noticed a change in her boss. He started having fun again. Dexter had truly forgiven his wife. Now, she just needed to forgive herself. But still, there was one thing that worried him, one thing that still made him uneasy. Dexter was busy in the studio. He sent Cindy to get props for the upcoming shoot while he worked on a small stage that needed to be prepared for the background. He had just hammered in the final nail when he remembered the GPS. He dropped the hammer and took out his phone. "Gotcha," he exclaimed out loud. There was not a second to think. He hurried to the desk in his office and wrote a note for Cindy. "I'll be back soon," was all it said. He ran out to the car and went to the address he saw on the device. He wasn't sure what he would find when he got there, but he prayed he wouldn't be too late. "Happy birthday, honey," Dexter said, handing Alicia a birthday card and kissing her. Afterwards, she purred as their lips parted. "Thank you, darling," she smiled as she read the card. Her smile grew even wider when she read his handwritten note inside, saying that he was taking her to dinner and dancing. It was a wonderful evening. The dinner was delicious, and Dexter spun the birthday girl around the dance floor until she couldn't dance another step. Later that night, they enjoyed a glass of wine while cuddling in the privacy of their living room. It had been 2 months since they had last left Dr. Ed Lindstrom's office. It was finally time for Dexter to explain everything. Alicia hugged her husband a little tighter. "Thank you, darling. Tonight was perfect." "Not really," he replied. The wounds of the past were still very fresh in her mind. Suddenly, Alicia pulled away to study his face. "What do you mean?" She looked worried. "I haven't given you a present yet," he said, taking a small box from his pocket. Although it was slightly wrinkled from being in his pants, it was adorned with a bright red bow. Alicia took it from his fingers and looked at him. "Can I open it?" "Sure, unless you want to wait until Christmas," he laughed. When she took the lid off the box, her eyes widened and her mouth fell open. Her pulse began to quicken and she took a deep breath. "Darling, where did you?" Tears filled her beautiful blue eyes and rolled down her cheeks. She tenderly and reverently took her grandmother's ring from the box. "I never thought I'd see that ring again." "How did you find it?" "While I appreciate what you did," Dexter replied, "I just couldn't accept that you had to give up something so precious to prove your love for me. Then I remembered that the GPS on my phone has a history. I traced routes you'd only taken once. I knew it wasn't a hair salon or a restaurant, so I looked at the address. It was a pawn shop. This should have been where you sold the ring, and they still had it after all this time." "Well, not really," he said, a little embarrassed. "I've had it for a while now. I actually got it just a few days after we got back together. I was going to give it to you right away, but you thought you needed to punish me a little more," she guessed. "I can't blame you for that," she said, wiping away tears of joy. "Yeah, well, your birthday was just a couple of months away. I thought it would be a good time for a gift." "Oh God, darling," she sobbed, hugging him and showering him with kisses. I swear on this ring that I will be the most faithful and loving wife a man could dream of." Never has one party brought so much destruction to so many people's lives, at least not in this city, Vicky thought. She was lucky her husband never had much of a temperament, and other than the silent treatment, she didn't think that her little incident with Intimate would cause big problems in their marriage. She was wrong. Over time, her husband became more and more estranged. He lost interest in Intim, in her, and in their marriage. He eventually found another woman and divorced Vicky. He never liked confrontation, but when it was all over, Vicky looked back and realized that their problems began on that fateful day in May. Mindy's husband, Mark, was forced to drop his lawsuit against the company but managed to get the dancer fired. He considered it a small victory. The divorce battle lasted for months. Mark hired an experienced lawyer and went on the offensive in an attempt to gain full custody of their 4-year-old son. He tried to declare Mindy an unfit mother. Mindy was fighting for her existence. In the end, she was able to avoid being charged with unfitness and was awarded custody of their son along with a small amount of child support, but not much more. Sylvia and Manny are still fighting. They spent more than 2 years in counseling and went through 3 therapists. They are still together, but the marriage is not the same as it used to be. Manny would never fully trust his wife again and subjected her to repeated interrogations. Every day, she regrets pulling down the dancer's thong. Now she prays every day that Manny will truly forgive her, but it doesn't look like that will happen anytime soon. Meredith and David were able to fix everything after each found out about the other's infidelity. They actually talked to each other for the first time in years. Both discovered that there was still a smoldering spark in their marriage and made efforts to fan the flames. They promised each other not to cheat or take each other for granted anymore, but to work on their relationship. So far, so good. Vanessa was out of luck. Terry hated all the travel he had to do for work. He always preferred to be at home with his wife and children. When he found out what happened in his own home while he was fulfilling his duties as a husband and father, he felt it as a betrayal and was deeply hurt. In the divorce, he had the children every other weekend. At work, he asked his boss to take him off business trips so as not to miss any of these precious weekends. When he was refused, he quit. After several months of unemployment, he found a job with a much smaller company at half his previous salary. As a result, his alimony payments were reduced. Vanessa received a small promotion at work, but it wasn't enough. Currently, in addition to working at Johnson's insurance company, she also works as a waitress at night to make ends meet. Wendy's life clearly didn't turn out the way she planned. After the disaster and humiliation at the reception, she returned to her parents. There, she cried for 2 days in a row. When the tears stopped, her parents talked to her. They said they loved her and would support her because she was their daughter, but there was disappointment in their eyes. Wendy was too embarrassed to go back to work for Johnson, so after a month of feeling sorry for herself, she took a job as a receptionist at another insurance company for a fraction of the salary she was making as a secretary. She still lives with her parents and does not go out or date men. However, this does not apply to her ex-husband. Immediately after Aaron's marriage ended, one of his bridesmaids, Judith, came to him to console him. Aaron didn't know that she had always had a crush on him but couldn't act on it because Wendy was her friend. At first, their relationship was purely platonic. That changed one night when Aaron couldn't bear the thought of her going home alone. They married 7 months later. Dexter and Alicia are still very much in love with each other. Alicia doesn't know if her loving husband thinks about her wrongdoing. He certainly hasn't mentioned it since he said he forgave her. She, however, thinks about it every day. Every day she remembers how close she came to losing the love of her life, and every day she makes a new vow to herself that she will treat her man with love, respect, and loyalty. What do you think of our story today? I think the story was quite long and interesting. I wanted to see it through to the end, and that's worth a lot. What was your impression of the story? Write in the comments. See you in the next video.